A few weeks back, I posted on LinkedIn and Andrea Caulfield left a comment. Now, Andrea is the World Language Curriculum Specialist in Denver Public Schools. She commented on the post that I put on that she uses podcast episodes as a way of bringing professional development and coaching to the 100 plus teachers in her district. I was intrigued to learn more about how she manages this logistically and wanted you to hear it as well in case you are interested in doing something similar. Andrea explains how she chooses and recommends episodes, works with teachers to engage with the topics, and then all of the logistics. So let's jump in. Are you a language teacher looking for some reassurance that what you're doing in the classroom is on the right track? Or maybe you're looking for some ways to teach even more effectively. If you're one or the other or somewhere in between, you've landed in the right place. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast with your host, me, Joshua Cabral. You're about to get tips, tools, and resources so that your students continue to rise in proficiency and communicate with confidence. Let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral, and you are an incredible language teacher, as I like to say every time we get together, because you're listening to a podcast about language teaching, and that to me means you're an incredible person. Today, we are going to talk about how we can use podcasts. I happen to be on LinkedIn, a new place I've been hanging out lately, and somebody left a comment on one of my posts, and her name is Andrea Caulfield, and she is in Denver, Colorado. And she said that she uses podcasts with the teachers in her district within her department as a form of professional development. And I said, that sounds incredible. I'm sure teachers would like to have some insights on how to do that if you're a department head, or suggest it to your department head. So I invited her on, and she was more than willing to come on. So we're very excited for this conversation. So as I said, Andrea Caulfield is a teacher in Denver Public Schools. She's actually the World Language Curriculum Specialist, and she is also a French and Spanish teacher and has also dabbled in writing CI novels as well, as I learn a little more about her. But within the Denver Public Schools district, there are about 90,000 students, and she oversees about 120 language teachers in 30 schools. So she is doing a lot of work with them. And there are programs in kindergarten through 12th grade in the district, and they offer French, Spanish, Italian, Japanese, Chinese, and Lakota, which we can learn a little more from her. But Andrea Caulfield, I am so thankful that you're with us today to talk about using podcasts as professional development. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me. It's an honor.
Yes.
I've been a listener for so long, so it's so fun to be a podcast guest.
Excellent. So before we get specifically into using these podcasts, could you tell us a little bit about having this Lakota program in your district, because this isn't sort of a typical language you would come across, and just tell us a little bit about what that looks like in Denver Public Schools.
Yeah, so we currently offer Lakota at 5 of our schools, 1 middle school and then 4 high schools. We have 4 Lakota teachers this year. It's our smallest language program, but it is a source of tremendous joy and something that we're really, really excited about. It's a mix of students who are learning Lakota as a heritage language and other students who are just really interested in it as a world language, as a language of the people that, were the original inhabitants of the land that we're on.
A lot of times when we talk about the research into language acquisition and comprehensible input, a lot of it tends to involve Spanish teachers and French teachers or Romance language teachers. So when you're looking at all of these different languages, including Lakota and having Japanese and Chinese, do you see a lot of the talk of language teaching being applicable to all of those languages? How do you see that?
Yes, I absolutely do, because of the power of storytelling in the human experience. It doesn't matter where you come from, what language you speak. We all really thrive on sharing our stories and hearing the stories of others. And so I think so much of modern language teaching really values storytelling as a central role in language teaching. And so for me, that's the big connector.
So I guess if you take out the idea of the grammatical focus and really using language as a communication tool, that the language doesn't play in as much. It's really about, as you said, the storytelling and the communication. I think when we get too bogged down with the grammar is when we think that it's only applicable to certain languages that have that grammar.
Oh, 100%. And I should tell you that we are a very ADI forward district, and there's not a lot of explicit grammar instruction happening anywhere.
So, as you are working with these 120 teachers over 30 schools in this very large district, I would love to hear what inspired you to start using podcast episodes as a professional development tool within your district and your department.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, teachers are able to take a course. They can opt in every year. It's a 45-hour course that they can use towards their recertification credits for their license or to apply for a salary lane change. And that course is in ADI fundamentals. And I'm one of three facilitators for it. Part of that course, we have to have material to study each year. We need new material. And we usually do some kind of a book study, but we needed some extra material. And teachers, for example, in the course have to do 7 hours of independent work that comes from a choice board that I create. I was, casting about for great material, and I was just finding that so many great things were coming out of a variety of podcasts that I was listening to. And I really wanted to include that in the media available to our teachers for our discussion. So that's kind of where it started. But then I also we use it as a replacement if teachers aren't able to attend our in-person PDs. That can count towards those hours. There's, it's kind of, you can't just pick any podcast, but there's some specifics to it. And then finally, I use it a lot in trainings when I'm meeting with a teacher and coaching around a particular skill. And I want them to maybe not just have that, hour with me, but like think on it again, do a deeper dive, hear a different perspective on the same topic. I have a database of podcasts that I can kind of say, I want you to listen to this episode because it's going to give you some more juice.
Yeah, I love that idea of using it for the individual teacher, because I was thinking, oh, using your department, everybody's listening to the same one and talking about it, which I'm sure is some of it we'll talk about. But that idea of having your list of specific episodes that are tailored to a particular challenge area or a place where a teacher wants to enhance their teaching. I don't like to always look at it as, oh, you need help, but ways to enhance. So that was interesting. I love that. You mentioned before the podcast, because I have to ask these things, that sometimes you do book studies. And what are like one or two of maybe the books you've used in this, just so that, they're part of the conversation?
Yeah. So 2 years ago, we read Common Ground, loved it. And you were doing podcasts right around the same time talking about it. And that was great help for me going into our conversations. I would listen to your episodes and be like, right, okay, these are the main points I need to be thinking about. Last year, we read Proficiency-Based Instruction, Input and Interaction by Catherine Ritz and Christina Toro. We've read, while we're on the topic, we've read Karen Lickman's TPRS book, which is quite a short text, but we really appreciated it.
Catherine Ritz is wonderful, and I had the authors of Common Ground on, both Florencia Henshaw and Maris Hawkins, and I will have Catherine Ritz on in a couple of weeks because she has a new book with Mike Travers, which is all about teaching grammar communicatively, and that was recently published through Actful, so we have an interview coming up on that. So I love that you're using these books, and these are the books that everyone is talking about. That's wonderful. So now if we're looking at maybe your department meetings, and I may be using that in a way that doesn't totally apply to you, but how do you structure these discussions and activities around podcast episodes with your teachers, to ensure that they are meaningful and focused on professional growth?
Yeah, well, so it was a little tricky at first because I wanted to offer a lot of choice, but also make sure that we were having some serious, meaningful discussions. So we developed a short list of questions that we feel like works for any podcast episode that teachers are listening to. And then if they're doing it as part of their independent choice work for this course, they either will do a written reflection with these questions, or if they want to listen to the same podcast with another course member, they can do their reflecting with that person or with one of the facilitators. But we kind of honed in on these questions that we felt like kind of helped us really dig into some learning.
Could you give us an example of what one of those questions might be, or two?
Yeah. So the first question is, what confirmed or challenged your beliefs while you were listening to this podcast? What were your takeaways? What is one change you're committed to making in your own practice based on your learning? And what steps do you need to take to make that change? Barriers to successful implementation that you foresee and how you might avoid them. And then how you'll measure success for the change you plan to implement. So as you can see, they're real action oriented. Like we want people to be doing something with this learning, because too often I think we engage in PD and we're all fired up and then we don't do anything different the next day.
And so when teachers have these episodes, in that situation, are you having teachers choose? You mentioned a choice board, right? Are they choosing which episode or which topic to focus on? Or do you do it more as a group topic where everyone is discussing the same theme or episode?
It depends. It depends on if it's, if it's something that we want to pull out for a whole group discussion, or if it's something that they want to just do for their choice work. But I have this database of episodes that are all listed by theme. And so like for this year, something that made it onto the choice board, I was just hearing so many teachers really struggling with burnout. And so I pulled a bunch of different episodes that were about sustainable practices and about avoiding burnout and finding your people and, easy, low prep ideas for lesson planning, and had that be like the deep dive into sustainable teaching. And then we did a different deep dive on story asking. I like that because if you can listen to multiple episodes on the same topic, first of all, you're getting lots of different perspectives from different podcast hosts and guests. And hopefully there's going to be one that resonates with you and your particular teaching context.
And so do you find that within specifically the language teacher world, and you can look at educational podcasts in general, but specifically language teachers that have podcasts, do you find that there are altering perspectives, or do you find that there's a commonality between themes?
Both and. I think, sometimes when you get really into the nitty gritty of like, what does this look like in my classroom? Sometimes somebody might have a really like big performer personality and you listen to their ideas and you think, well, that is awesome for them, but it is not how I show up in my class. So, even within the language teacher world, I think sometimes we can hear people's ideas and think that will work for me, or that sounds awesome for somebody else. So I try to give, a lot of options, although all of our podcast options are world language podcast specific. I don't have anything from outside of world language.
What are some of the benefits that you've seen in your department since incorporating podcasts into your PD model, either globally, maybe it's just brought on easier conversations or more directed conversations, or maybe there's been specific teacher implementation that has come out of it? What have been your successes with it?
I pulled yesterday the portfolios from our end of course to see what teachers had written about the podcast that they had listened to kind of get a sense for impact. And I got things from, I have some quotes here. I had one teacher who said, listening to the podcast reinforced my belief in the importance of comprehensible input and language acquisition. So I love that. I had another teacher said that he got great advice for do nows and giving students feedback in order, like what kind of actionable feedback was most impactful. Another teacher said that he gained so much practical knowledge in regards to classroom management, lesson planning, and activities. Some called out really specific strategies. Somebody who had listened to your episode with Lisa Shepard said that The podcast had many ideas for how to use authentic resources and critical thinking with novice learners. I'm so excited to use I Think, I Wonder, and attempt a CER at some point in my classes.
In general, how have teachers responded to having podcasts as a way to engage in this material as opposed to reading an article? What has been
Oh,
their impressions on that?
it's been overwhelmingly positive for a variety of reasons. You can do it while you're making dinner, while you're driving to work. We have some podcast options that are in Spanish, which for our teachers whose dominant language is Spanish, they're delighted to have the opportunity to have some PD that is also in Spanish. I think the bite-sized nature of a podcast, and then sometimes you go to a conference and you've listened to a bunch of podcast hosts and guests, and all of a sudden you know who you want to see at that conference because you've heard them talk and you're excited to learn from them again and learn more, learn about a different topic. So I love that as well. And then from a practical standpoint, like budgets are getting tight. A lot of times districts can't afford to send teachers to conferences. So I think people are discovering that, you know what? I would love to go to more conferences, but if I can't, that doesn't it's not a binary, well, now I can't get any PD. Like there's lots of ways to access free PD.
Yeah. And the free nature of podcasts is pretty amazing. I listen to so many myself outside of the language teaching world and within the language teaching world. I listen to, this is a very sort of meta, but I listen to a lot of podcasts about podcasting, because I have to always learn more things. But with all of that being, as you're driving to school, and the fact that it's free is pretty amazing, but I hadn't thought about that fact of, you hear somebody on a podcast and then of course you're going to go to their workshop. You know them, you want to learn more, so those things are very interesting there.
Well, and I think too with language teacher podcasts, I mean, we're not famous outside of our language teacher world. And so what that means is that, like I'm always telling teachers, if you have a question, write that podcast host or guest a quick email or send them a message, because like they're teachers, like they want to help too. And I think realizing that you can access an expert in our field in that way, and that like there's a decent chance they're going to respond, is super empowering to teachers to get their questions answered in that way.
Yes, absolutely. I get so many emails or social media questions about things, and I love that. The way we connected on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
like, of course, I'm going to respond to that. Of course, that's absolutely wonderful. And so, you mentioned a little bit earlier you're putting together the different episodes for teachers, but sort of do you have a process for, are you just listening to episodes all the time? And like, what is that for you? I just imagining how overwhelming. Do you spend your whole day listening and then parsing them out? So what does that look like logistically for you?
Well, so logistically, I support 30 schools, so I'm in my car a lot. So I have some time. And if I'm in my car, like during the workday, I kind of feel like I need to like be making good use of that time. So I'm usually listening to a language learning podcast or a coaching podcast or something like that. And I think, just as ideally, we would never put something in front of our students that we hadn't watched or listened to. I don't want to put that in front of our teachers if I don't feel like it's in line with our values as a district. And so, yeah, I do listen to all of them before I put them in our database. And sometimes there's nothing like I may not add one to the database, not because there's anything inherently wrong with it, but it just may not apply so well to like an urban, large public school district context. So I just want to make sure that they are as hard hitting as I'd like them to be for the topics that I feel like we're working on as a district.
Now, this is a nitty gritty logistical question that I know listeners are thinking of, and they're like, he better ask this. So I'm going to ask, first off, when you say you give them the link to an episode, where is that link going? Are they going to the website that has the episode on there? Is it going to Apple, podcasts? Where's the links that you're using for teachers to listen to podcasts?
So currently, and you can tell me if I should change this all up, if there's a better way. Currently, all of them are Apple Podcast links to the actual episode.
Oh, okay.
But if there's a better way that's going to be, more impactful for our podcast producers, you let me know.
No, I think that if they click on the link and they hear it, that's the right way. It doesn't matter where it's going if they hear it when they go there. Are you doing this sort of in a Google Doc? Where are teachers accessing that?
It's in a Google Sheets and it's just sorted by theme. Although while that's available, kind of anytime anybody wants to look at that, the ones on our choice board are sort of more targeted to things that I'm noticing that I want our teachers to be really, that feel like important needs for us this year.
Mm-hmm. And do you find that your teachers are mostly listening to them on the Apple Podcast, or do some prefer Spotify? Just curious if you've heard from your teachers.
I'm sure they are all over the map on that. I just connect them with it, and then they can, if they want to follow on whatever their favorite listening platform is, more power to them.
Yes, people figure it out with the technology. It's not an issue. I was just wondering if you had sort of a way of making sure you get them all out there. And so, what advice would you give to language department leaders or teachers listening that even if they just want to collaborate with their peers, but if they're in a leadership position, if they want to implement a podcast-based professional development program, where should they start? What would you recommend?
Well, I think the first thing is they have to become a listener themselves. And then I think I would start by really reflecting on your pedagogical values as a district and as a department, and where you're at currently and where you aspire to be. The whole reason that I had my eyes on Denver Public Schools for the longest time, because they are such an ADI forward district, and I really wanted to be a part of it. Our teachers have a lot of years of practice with ADI, a high level of training, ready for something deep. But you really got to think about where your district teachers are at and what they're ready for next. What's the next step for you and your team? Mm-hmm. And then I think, finding a voice that resonates with you. Some podcast hosts and guests are going to just be a home run for what you're looking for. And others might be like less so for, doesn't mean it's not a great podcast, but just find a voice that resonates with you.
Mm-hmm. I really liked, as you were saying at the very beginning, about those questions that they look into as they listen to whatever episode. They're the same questions, because I think that sometimes we think logistically it has to be so specific and I have to create all these materials for this one topic. But when you put those questions out there, they were applicable to whatever the topic was, so I would say that, if you can come up with those questions or listen back to the beginning of this episode, you can hear Andrea's questions and see what those are so that they can implement them there right away. The other thing I would say in terms of our side, the podcaster side of all of this, is when you're reaching out because you have a question and you said, oh yeah, you can reach out to them, they're most likely going to answer. The other thing that I love is when a teacher, reaches out to me and asks me to look into a particular topic that I haven't done. And I recommend if you're looking for the topic and you can't find it, reach out, not just to me, but any podcaster would love to know what those topics you're looking for that you couldn't find. Have you ever tried doing that?
I haven't, but I'm going to start.
Yes.
There's definitely topics that we are digging into in our in-person discussions that come up, and we'd love to have more perspectives. Mm-hmm. So I'll be emailing you.
No, absolutely. And there are certain things that I would say that I can have the voice on. I have a really strong knowledge of the theory behind it, the research. I've done it myself. And then it might be a topic that I don't have the experience with, but I have a group of colleagues within the language teaching world where I can invite them on. I often get questions about teaching heritage language classes, like full heritage, not just one or two in the class, but a full class of heritage speakers.
Yeah.
That's not something I've ever done. But I have a friend, Courtney Nygaard, who teaches in Minneapolis. And so when teachers start asking those specific questions, I email Courtney and I say, Courtney, we need to do another episode. There are more questions on this, but if I don't know what's happening in everyone's classrooms and you'd like to know, then I'm just sort of doing what I think everyone wants to hear. So I totally recommend that you reach out to us and tell us what those topics are.
I love that.
Yes,
Will do.
absolutely. Sure thing. And like I said, if it's something like, oh, okay, yeah, I can do that. If not, I will reach out and we will get it done for you. Absolutely. So if we have some listeners who are looking into doing this and they would like to touch base with someone like you who has done this with experience, how can our listeners be reaching out to you?
You're always welcome to email me.
What's the best email address to reach you?
So it's Andrea_Caulfield at dpsk12.net.
Okay, and I will make sure that is in the show notes for sure. And before we say our goodbyes, I like to leave our listeners with a hearty piece of advice. So about teaching or maybe about podcasts, what can you leave us with?
Anytime you do any professional development, it is so tempting to throw out everything you're doing and change up everything. And that is a fast road to burnout. So I think my biggest piece of advice to teachers is to find one bite-sized change to implement, and then to actually take the time to reflect on how it went, to iterate, and then to reflect again. And just go slow. Like ideally, we're in this career for many, many years, and we have a lot of time to make a lot of changes gradually.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Don't burn out.
Yeah. That burnout piece, I think, comes from this constant feeling of having to do it in a new way or to improve and to be better. And that burnout piece is why I say in the intro to the podcast, and I say as I open each episode, that if you're here to learn something new, great. But if you're also here to get reassurance that you're on the right track, that's great as well. And going to PD or listening to a podcast is not always about, oh, what can I be doing better every day? And I don't have time for that. But to also get that reassurance that you're a rock star yourself, and you need to hear that once in a while. So thank you for bringing that piece of the burnout and not having to do all of it.
My team at work is reading The Burnout Fix, and they have a whole chapter on there that's about seeking support and how success only happens when we are interconnected, and just the importance of finding the people who can support you in the work you do. And podcasts are a great way to find some of those people.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Andrea Caulfield, for spending this time with me and for giving us the insight of how you're using podcasts as a free way of doing professional development with all of your teachers. They're incredibly lucky to have you, I will say, hearing everything you're saying.
I'm lucky to have them.
I know you have to say oh, no, don't say that. But I'm listening to you and I'm thinking that you know, with the number of schools and the number of teachers, the number of languages, and what you're doing for these teachers is wonderful. So thank you very much for the work you're doing. And thank you for joining us today.
Well, I really appreciate that. I have my dream job, and I am so excited to just be able to work with teachers and help them grow. Thank you so much for having me.
What are your takeaways from that conversation with Andrea Caulfield? I hope that you are perhaps considering ways to bring podcast content into your professional development in a more collaborative way with colleagues. Be sure to check out the show notes to connect with Andrea Caulfield. You'll also see the link to sign up for Talking Points, my weekly email newsletter with tips and resources for language teaching. There are also links to get in touch with me if you'd like to work together. And remember, we can do that in person in your school or remotely. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to the World Language Classroom podcast. Be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so that you never miss an episode. Let's keep the conversation going on social media. Connect with me on X, aka Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WL Classroom. And for even more valuable resources, visit my website, WLClassroom.com, where you'll find over 300 blog posts about language teaching. So stay inspired, keep growing, and continue making a difference in your language classroom.